All right, welcome back to this exciting tutorial. We're going to be taking a look at how to create procedural materials and using cycles this time to help us visualize the material. We're also going to finish out our rock spire material and layer it up with a lot of interesting layers. So we're trying to create an interior that looks like it's flowing with magma and an exterior that's like a melted rock. So these kind of two different types of surfaces are going to be working together in the one material. All right, so first let's get cycles set up. So over here on the side, we've got our camera tab. That's the top one for what render engine we're using. And we're gonna switch from EV over to cycles. Now, yours is probably set to CPU like mine, and this is what it is initially set up to use. And if we just go ahead and switch on our rendering, so you can hit the Z key and it brings up our shading options, or you can select them up here. It's the same thing. I'm just gonna go rendered. You can see here at the top, we've got these numbers counting up. Now this is the number of samples. So sampling is really important. This is how many rays of light are being bounced around the scene. So at the moment, our viewport is doing 32 rays and our render is doing 128. So if I move around, you can see it slowly counts up to 32. Now, if we switch it from CPU to GPU, it'll switch and start using your internal GPU, and you can see it goes a whole lot quicker. Now, you have to set this up for the first time. If you go up to Edit in Preferences, and under the Preferences menu down here under System, the first thing it'll show you is Cycle Render Devices, and you've got your GPU will appear here depending on what you have installed in your machine. So you can select that. You can also use the CPU as well at the same time and have them work together, but I find that on my machine it's quicker if I just stick with the CUDA GPU. All right, so all set up. Another good tip is you can use the box select tool, or the box viewport render. So if we hit Control B, get this little crosshair, and you can drag a box around your view, and that's going to render just what's within that box. So if we zoom in, you can see it's not rendering anything outside of the box. And to get rid of that, you can just hit Control Alt B, and that removes it. So that's a helpful tip, just to speed things up a bit. All right, so let's take a look at our material. Now we've got our graph from last time. This is what we started with, and this giving us just some slight variation in the color, and we've got a bump that's happening, and a lot of different variations in our specular and our reflective material. So we're gonna kind of work with the same thing, but we're just gonna try and push it a bit further. Okay. So first up, let's take a look at improving our bump texture. Okay, so I'm gonna just unplug our bump for now, and we're gonna just take a look at our node graph. And we've got a lot of different things happening in our node graph, and it's gonna get really easy to get confused about what's happening. So I'm gonna try and simplify things a little bit by grouping these node groups. Okay, so we've got our initial image that everything is kind of being built off of. So this is the fractal pattern that we've created. So if we, just as a refresher, if we pull up our emission, if you don't have this, you can just hit Shift A to add shader, and we want to pull out an emission shader. This is just a great way to preview what we're doing. So if I connect the color output of our little image here, of our little graph, to the color of the emission, and then pipe that into the surface, you can see what these nodes are creating for us. So this is our kind of base image that everything is being based on. Now, one thing I don't like about it is how we're getting this like kind of harsh difference between this area and this area, the light and dark. So I'd like that to be more of a graduated effect. Now, that's coming from our Musgrave. If I mute this one, you can see it goes away. If you hit M, that mutes things, so you can turn stuff off and on. So what I might do is let's try something else. Let's take our Verona and hit Shift D to duplicate. And I'm gonna pipe that in to our factor. And let's change the scale. So we'll make this one go real small. And let's go right down with it and just kind of see what that's gonna look like. That's cool. Okay, so that's creating a little bit of a nice variation. We could also check out some of these different options that we've got. That gives us kind of like a star pattern. And that's kind of nice. That could be interesting. Bring it up Bring it right down. It's almost like a cube, like pixelated look, so it may not serve us well, but let's find out. Let's see what it looks like. So let's just go ahead and pipe our output of our shader back into the surface graph and kind of see what that's looking like. Yeah, that's looking too boxy, too much like we've pixelated our object. So that's not going to work. We'll just go back to the main standard. Could even create a combination of these two. So let's see what that does. Let's take these and we're going to mix them together. So let's hit Shift A and we're going to go Color, Mix RGB, and we're going to take the factor of both and then take that and pump that into the factor. All right, so that's a bit more interesting. We can change the way in which it blends, so we can only look at one, only look at the other, and then right in the middle, like 0.5 is a nice mix of the both. That's pretty good. I like that. It looks a bit more natural. So we're using different types of noise generators to create more natural and realistic variations. Okay, let's just change, see what the factor is looking like as we ramp between the two. Something like that's kind of good. Okay, now to simplify things a little bit, what we're going to do is we're going to take this initial group, which is creating, again, our initial base gradient that everything is being built on. And we're going to select them all, and then we're going to hit Control G. And that's going to create a group. And if I hit Tab, we can jump back out, and there it is. So now it's this own little thing. We're going to call it, so right now it's called Node Group. Just expand that out so you can see. So we'll call this Rock Spire Base Image. Okay, so there we go. So that just helps us keep track of where we're at and what's going on. Now, another thing we can do to help clean things up is we can actually add a reroute node. Okay, so it's just a little dot basically, and what we can do with that dot is we can, for example, pipe the color of our mix for our color out and then pop it into the base. And now if I hit G, I can grab that and put that wherever I want. So it's a great way to kind of clean up your graph and help things to just make a bit more sense. Next up, we're gonna go ahead and create the glowing magma section. So we want the glowing magma to happen kind of at the hot point of this red area. So where it's the most kind of solid red is where we want to have the glow to be peeking out. I also want to create some cracks in this. In fact, we might make the cracks first and then jump into that. So let's also first, I'm just going to turn off, bring off our roughness, and let's go ahead and pop the so our bump system. Let's take our normal and pop that back into the normal there, and that's pretty cool. I want to expand my color ramp here just so that we're getting bump from everything. That's much better. And I'm just going to play with my distance and strength. So I'm just going to lower my distance down to like 0.2, and I'll bring my strength up. And that's kind of nice. So that's starting to give much more of a ridged effect. Okay, now the other thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our texture is being placed properly on our object. So we need to worry about basically how it's placing things, wrapping them onto the surface. Okay, so let's jump into our main texture image that we're creating. And you'll see here in each of our 3 bits, we've got a vector. Each of our noise generators, we've got this thing called vector. And we can use that to basically tell Blender how to place this on the object. And it's a great way to keep it consistent across everything so we don't have anything mess it up. But I want to do this for everything that needs a vector. So I'm going to do it for any other sort of things that we create that we're going to pipe into different areas. So let's create it as a separate thing. So what we need to do is let's grab the vector of one of these. So we'll grab our first one, the Musgrave, and we're going to pop it into the group input. Okay. And then if I tab out, you can see now we've got this input, which is going to be vector. Okay. Now I will plug each of the vectors into the one vector. So they're all reading from the same vector input. I'll make sure I've got all of them. Okay. And now we're going to create something called input. Where is it? Texture coordinate. So this node gives us a lot of options for how to place a texture on an object. So we're going to use the first one, generated. You can try what these different ones do. If you do a UV layout and you unwrap your object, you can use the UV. Object is based on the object itself. A camera is based on where your camera's at, so it would move as your camera moves. There's some interesting things to play with here, but generated is going to be good for our purposes. So what we're going to do then next is we're going to grab a, let's see, vector and a mapping. And the vector mapping node gives us the ability to move a texture around on an object. So we'll grab generated, we'll pop it into vector, we'll grab vector here, and we'll pop it into here. Okay. Now you can see nothing really changed a whole lot, but because we've set this system up, now we can do cool stuff like move our texture across our surface, or we can scale it up on the X or the Y, or scale it down. So this actually becomes quite powerful. We can do some really interesting stuff to play around with the texture and see what we can get it to do. So you can see there, that's pretty cool. It's, we've scaled it down a whole lot. So now it's affecting things in a very different way. So this is very helpful for us just to iterate and experiment and try different types of things. It's also a great way for us to create variation if we create multiple versions of this texture. Okay, so let's pop that back into 1. So we'll leave that for now, and we can play with that more later. Cool. We also might want to go ahead and take this and put that into a group as well. So let's do that. And let's call this group our texture coordinate. Let's see, texture core. Okay, it's shaping up. Let's get these cracks happening next. I want to have these cracks kind of happening all over the surface. So we're going to come right over here, and we're going to just look back at just our emission shader just to simplify things. So I'm going to unplug the surface of our main texture and pop emission back in. And let's create a vector. No, we're going to go shader. No, texture. That's what we want. And Voronoi. Pop our factor into color. And let's just scale it down a bit so we can see what we're looking at. And let's also go ahead and grab this guy. So now if we just select this and hit Shift D, we can grab our texture coordinate and pop it into the vector. And if I tab into this and affect this here, it's going to affect everywhere that's using this same node. So this node is linked. It's linked to itself. You could tell because it's got that number 2. Remember with textures in our first tutorial, we talked about how that number indicates how many data blocks there are that are using this object. So that's really helpful. We can affect it all in just one simple way now. Okay, so we've got our Voronoi texture, and we're going to switch it from intensity to cells. And that gives it this different look, this kind of nice cell pattern. And we're going to use this to generate our cracks. So what I want to do is wherever a cell meets another cell, I'm going to create a bit of a line so we get this little cracked look. So we're going to have to get clever to pull this off, okay? So put your clever hat on. We're going to go advanced for a minute and hang in there. Okay, we're going to duplicate this. So we've got 2 of the same thing. Now, if you think of these things in terms of math, okay, so think of the value. Black is 0, white is 1. So each of these is a gradient, solid color, solid value. And so like this might be, it's not black, so maybe it's, 0.2. And this isn't quite white, but it's almost white. Maybe it's 0.9. Okay, so we want these values to cancel each other out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change we'll experiment with how to do it best, but we're going to change the scale of this cell system so that instead of being, 43.5, it'll be 43.4. So say that slight variation means that they're going to overlap differently. And we want that difference to create a new number, and we want where things are the same to create 1, basically. Just cancel out, be white. So think about how you would get this, say, 0.8 to become 1. Well, the best way to do it is divide it by 0.8, right? So 0.8 divided by 0.8 equals 1. It goes into each other once. So if we take this Voronoi texture, make sure that we've got the same values in our scale, And if we go Shift A and add a converter math node, and we switch from add to divide, we take the factor and we plug that into the values. So now we're dividing this with this. Everything that's the same, which these are both the same, should equal 1, which would mean we'd get white if we pump the value into color. So let's see what that happens. Boom. Okay, so now we have full white. Now watch what happens if we change one of these just a little bit. So instead of 0.5, we'll go 0.4. All right. So now we're getting some difference. And you can kind of see what's happening. It's the scale that's changing. It's causing it to overlap differently. So instead of the same number being on top of the same number, it's one of these value differences on top of a different number. And so you get a different value when you divide. And that's a kind of one way of getting this crack. Another way would be we could move it slightly. So we could try going to if we go for a vector mapping node, and we pop it in here. And we don't pop it in here. So we just put our normal vector in to this one and not this one. And let's make sure our scale's the same. So it should be back to 1. And then if we move it, let's say 1 notch over, that's heaps. All right, 0.1, that's tons. 0.001. Okay, so there you go. You're starting to see difference. 0.0001. So that's just moving it so slightly that you're only getting the tiniest of variations. So that's pretty cool. Now, if we click clamp, it's going to make sure that we don't have any super values, anything over 1 or below 0. So that's clamped it off. And that's going to give us just a little bit of a crack effect. So I might try the same here and move it on the Y value. And that'll give us a little bit more. Let's try moving it on the Z. This sometimes will do things. Okay, it's kind of cool. So we're getting some nice stuff. These are a bit thick, so I might try. Okay, so it's coming from the Y value. So let's just add another 0 in. Maybe another 0. Same here, add in another 0. It's a bit too much, so let's make that a 5. Okay, so that's a subtle effect. All right, now in order to get it to really work well for us, I want to change the value of things. Instead of this being gray and this being kind of a little darker gray, I'd like to use black and white. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new math node. So we're going to go converter math. I'll pop that in here, and I'll switch this to greater than. Okay, and then I'm just going to drop this and bring it right up to, let's say, 0.9. There we go. And then let's do the same. Let's grab that and switch it to a less than and pop it there, and there we go. So basically everything that's everything is greater than 0.9. It was coming through as black, right? Yeah. I think that's what's happening. You know, math. Sort of theoretical, right? Point is the result's good, right? That's all that matters. All right, so we've got cracks. Look at that. Let's group them up. So I'm going to grab all of that, and we're going to hit Control G, and we're going to call this group our cracks. And we'll unplug that from the emission, and boy, we got really far over there, didn't we? Let's move that back here and unplug our emission. Now this is kind of slow, the whole emission thing. There are quicker ways of doing this. There is a plugin that you can activate that will give you hotkeys. You can just automatically check out emission, but it's good to do it this way at the beginning, just to kind of wrap your head around it so you understand what's going on in the back end. So it's not too mysterious if something breaks. Okay, let's get our cracks incorporated in. So first, let's pop them into our bump. So at the moment, we're getting all of our bump from our master image. So we're going to include this in our bump here. So let's go for a color and mix RGB, and we'll put it here. And we'll just drop it in and see what we get. Keep it set to multiply. All right, so we set that to multiply. We're just going to back this off till we've got a nice mix of the two Yeah, cool. Great. It's a subtle effect, but it's nice. It's nice. Let's try and pronounce it. Let's get it a little more pronounced. So let's, how could we do that? Let's jump into cracks. So the scales are the same. So let's create a value. So we're going to go input value, and we'll pipe that in. I'll just copy the value that we're using at the moment, paste it in there, and we'll put it into both of these guys. And in fact, what we could do is we could just do this. Take our scale, stick it there, and take our scale and pipe it there. And if we jump out, our cracks has a new value in it, which is scale. So we can actually change this number here to give us even more control. Yeah, cool. So you can see we're getting a lot more cracks there. It's coming through nicely. It still might increase our factor. We might need to jump in and increase the size by increasing these values here. So if we change this to, let's just get rid of one of the zeros, make that a 1. And same here, match that. So now it's a bit thicker. Let's take this system and we're going to duplicate it. Duplicate it, pull it up here, and we're going to mix it with this one. So again, I think we need to take, so color, RGB mix color, take our first and our second value, pop it in here, and we'll create a new scale factor for these guys. Okay, so now if I jump out, we've got 2 scale values, and I can increase one and decrease the other. All right, there we go. So now that's getting much more interesting cracked pattern. So we got some cracks. That's cool. So now I'd like to start building up the glow. So let's create the magma layer again, right where things are hottest here. And then we're also going to use the cracks to affect the magma layer. Okay. So let's do that. So what we're going to do is, well, we need to have a new material that glows. So we're going to use an emission shader, and we need to then affect the way it mixes with this shader in some way. So let's go back to our original main color thing that's kind of motivating everything. And or even better, let's look at a step ahead. Let's look at our colors themselves. So this one right here, let's have a look at this one. If I grab my color output and stick it into the color of my emission and stick that to the surface. Okay, so we're just looking at what what this one's doing for us. And I like that. I want to keep the same basic thing. We're just going to crunch it a bit further. So let's use this color ramp to base our emission shader on. Now I'm going to duplicate these 2 guys, bring them up here, because again, it's the same system. It's just been, the group is just duplicated. But I'm going to do that so it's a bit cleaner for us. And I'll pump the color into the factor. And let's bring that over to our emission. Now we're actually going to use this as our emission shader. So now let's take a look at what's going on here. So I might drag this down a bit just so we're isolating our emission just for the, these brightest areas. And I'm also going to grab this and I'm going to increase the brightness on it so that it's full brightness. And I'll drag it all the way over. Maybe not all the way, maybe just part of the way. Bring this one over a touch. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So now we're just getting it in these little bits. And I'm going to turn my strength right up. So let's go to like 10, something crazy to start with. So now this shader is actually emitting light into the scene, red light. So if I was to turn off everything, so turn off our lights and turn off, bring the color of our world down to full black, you can see it's actually casting light into the scene. So we're going to, actually, I'll start looking at things with maybe, I'll have it a bit darker. So our final scene is going to be dark. So we want to make sure we're thinking about it in terms of how we're going to be, the scene we're going to bring it into. All right, now let's mix these 2 shaders together. All right, so we want to grab a shader, mix shader. There you are. And we're going to bring the emission into the top node and with the BSDF, principal BSDF into the bottom. And we're going to pipe that into the surface of our material. And voila, there you go. So we can look at just our principled BSDF, or we can bring the other one in slowly. And this is a great way for us to kind of regulate how bright, how much emission is gonna come through. So let's just pull it in a little bit. Yeah, it's nice. Okay, it's looking good. Okay, now I want these cracks to affect it as well. I want like some of these cracks to be so deep that they're actually showing some of the magma through. Also, we might just decrease this a little bit so it's not as prominent. Subtlety is key when it comes to realism. Okay, so let's grab our cracks. Where's our crack system? Here we go. I think we can also, you can also hit Shift A and go to group, and you can add in any of the groups that we've made. So we'll bring in cracks here. Actually, I'll duplicate so we've got the same input values. So I want to use those. Okay, so we want to, what do we want to do? Let's have just a quick look at what this thing looks like. Okay, so it's white. So our cracks are white and everything else is going to be black. Bring this back. So we want to add this onto this. Or no, we're going to add it to the factor. So let's get a color mix RGB. Bring that there, bring this up here. Okay, and then we're going to be adding. Okay, clamp. So that's what it looks like if we're fully just looking at this and fully looking at just this. So we can just bring in the cracks just a little bit. Let's see what it looks like up close. All right, that's pretty cool. I might affect this a little bit differently. So let's grab a color ramp and bring that in here. And instead of full white, I'm going to dim it down so it's not so intense. And I might bring the factor up a little bit more. It's getting us some really nice patterns here. You can see too, it follows the bump, which is really cool. So the bump is actually mimicking, so we actually get glows within the same place as we're getting the bump. And that's how these materials at least start working together. All these things start compounding one on top of the other. Another helpful thing when trying to boil down a texture like this is to apply it to a few different surfaces just to get a full look. So if we click our floor and switch down to materials in our drop down and put our rock surface onto this, we can get a look at what it's looking like on a ground plane as well, which is pretty cool. And I might even bring in a UV sphere to do the same thing. So let's put that on. So this is a great way to just kind of see what's the procedural effect, what's it doing overall, and what's it going to look like on different types of materials. Okay, I am feeling really good about this so far. I'm liking it. I like the variation that we've got. I like the different effects that we have. Let's think about how we can just do one or two more things to really help sell this material. So one thing to think about is our scratches. They're just as shiny and reflective as the rest of our surface. So it's probably a good idea for us to affect our specular with that. So right now we've got a specular of 0.081, which is kind of like as high as we want to go. But we want to drop these areas down to black. So let's grab our cracks again, bring it over here. And I'm going to grab a color ramp, so converter, color ramp, and I'm going to input my value into here. And the brightest we want to go is 0.0, it's actually even bigger number, 0.080986. So I'm going to copy that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put that value in here. So of course we've got an RGNB, so it's a vector, so it's 3 values, but we're going to put the same number into all 3 because we want to stick it with white. stick to white. So now the brightest we're going to get is that number. But the darker areas are going to go like this. Now, of course, our cracks, remember the bright is the crack interior, so it's not going to work properly. So if I go to specular, it's going to make everything really dark except for inside the cracks, which we don't want to do. So we're going to flip these. So now it's going to take the whites and make them black. So they're going to be 0 specular, and then everything else is going to be, should be the same. There we go. Okay, so it's a subtle effect. If we go right in to one of these cracks, you might be able to see the effect that it's producing for us. If we move out, the cracks look a little darker and a little more pronounced. Same with roughness. Let's think about that. So we want our roughness as set to this number. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to duplicate this, Shift-D, and go to my brightest point, and I'm going to input that value. And let's take our cracks, put it into the factor, and let's stick that into our roughness. We'll grab input. We're going to go ambient occlusion. Now, ambient occlusion basically creates dark areas where our geometry is close together. So if we grab our emission again, I can show you how this looks. Pop the AO into color and surface. You can see how it's darker where we're getting things close. If I click only local, then it won't affect it when it's close to the ground. And it's just affecting itself. And then what we can do is we can pop a color ramp. So converter, color ramp between these two and really accentuate things a little bit more nicely. So that's cool. So now we can use this to drive different things in our objects. We can use this to affect color. We can use it to affect our glow a little bit. We could do a lot of interesting things. So let's see what we can pull off. I will take this little network. We're going to pump our shader back into the surface, and let's try using it to affect our specular first. Okay, so we'll bring it over to where our specular work is happening, which is right here. And what I want to do is multiply this value into this one. So those dark areas are going to cancel things out and move the specular to 0. So let's do a color, a mix RGB, pop that there, bring this color in, and switch it to multiply and put it all the way up to the max. Now, what that's done for us is it's kept our specular here, like on these surface areas, but then in these crevice areas, it's gone even darker. So we can meet this to see the difference. We could do the same thing for our roughness if we wanted to. So I can just close these down so we've got a little bit more room to see what's happening. And we can duplicate this multiply, pop it there, and grab this again and put it in the top value. And now it's doing the same thing. And we can pronounce that even more if we wanted to by dragging this out. And that's really going to accentuate the interior parts of our object. We could also tick inside as well if we wanted to incorporate, the inside geometry, but that's going to knock everything out. We could also get rid of only local, and you see we'll get this kind of weird dark ring. So that's not really working for us. So anyways, it's looking really cool. I'm seeing my purple a lot more, which I don't know if I'm happy about. So I'm going to come back over here, and we're going to move that towards the reds. That does feel a bit more unified with our design. If we go back up to blue for contrast, maybe drop out into the blacks, full black. It's all right, but just not as realistic. I feel like we do need some kind of color value in it. Might keep it there. All right, cool. So there you have it. how to layer and create really interesting procedural textures. So we've gone through and we've created a really complex node graph. Well, not really complex, but pretty complex, especially if this is your first time. Well done. Congratulations. This is going to really serve you well. You can play with these numbers and these values and these systems that we've built, the groups, the nodes, and get all kinds of different effects that work with different objects. Now we're going to use this same base material across our entire scene, creating this texture and varying it for our floor, for our ground, for the other spikes and spires that appear in our scene. So we're going to see it a lot and using it a lot. So I hope you're happy with it. Feel free to keep playing around with it, create your own variation. And yeah, it's a really, really fun bottomless pit to get lost in. So I hope you had a lot of fun with this tutorial. I hope you learned a lot of really cool things and you're ready to jump into your own projects to make some really amazing materials. Thanks again for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And I will do my best to stay on track and keep bringing these tutorials to you so you can get amazing at Blender 2.8 and eventually After Effects when we get to it. All right, thanks again for watching, and I will catch you next time.